London has these ancient structures, and then 1750 and 1800, the population skyrockets. How do these ancient structures try to cope with the mass urbanization that occurs in 19th century London?
By the turn of the 19th century, that you've got a city of, 1 million or more people, with effectively water wars between competing companies, abstracting water from rivers which are also being used as sewers, and no sewage system. So that begins to build up pressure from reformers, classic Victorian reformers, for intervention. Now, the intervention, of course, is strongly resisted by London's fragmented government, because the last thing it wants is some top-heavy bureaucracy, as it would be seen today, put on top of it, perhaps taking its power.
But it's hard to imagine how scores of small local governments are going to handle anything like a sensible citywide sewer system, right?
I mean, not only was it impossible to imagine, it was actually impossible.
Yeah.
I mean, it led to cataclysmic problems. By the 1850s, the river was in the Thames was on occasions, catching fire, which is not a good sign for a river. This is what led to pressure for the creation of a citywide metropolitan authority with power and resources, which could begin to address these problems.
And so Parliament sets this up, and what does it do?
Well, Parliament sets it up after, famously, the Great Stink, so dire that Parliament could no longer meet on hot summers on that side, on the river side of its buildings, and that even Parliament...
What a good thing for government that Parliament is on the river, right? They can't avoid it.
So something called the Metropolitan Board of Works was set up, a wonderful Victorian name if you think about it. So it's not a new municipal authority, but a Board of Works, and it was deliberately called this because it was effectively a joint committee of the City of London and all the pre-existing parishes and boards that existed, who would send members up to this board, and they would control what it did. So it was really a joint committee of the smaller institutions.
What year about?
This would have been between 1855 and 1875, 1880.
So this is a turning point in the city that enables it to move from death to longer lives. What changes in the 20th century? What are the big shifts that...
Well, if we just carry the Board of Works forward a bit, I mean, the Board of Works sort of became, as they say, mired in corruption towards the end of its life. And the government, the UK government at the time, is pushing through reforms to local government outside London, and so neatly creates a so-called County of London, which is a slightly odd name if you think of it for a city, but a County of London in the then more or less the built-up area of London in 1888, 89. And that, the London County Council, becomes the prototype for metropolitan government in Britain thereafter. The one thing, of course, that survives all of this reform is the City of London Corporation, which always lobbies against major reform, and when there is one, convinces Parliament to leave it alone.
How effective do you think the county council is over the course of the 20th century? So it comes about in the late 19th. It's called upon to deal with further changes in the 20th. How does it do?
The London County Council begins to use the power of taxation to deliver enormous social programmes. So it starts to build social housing in the inner East London, replacing slums with homes that are still there today. You can still visit the Boundary Estate today, which are model social homes at the time.
What era?
These were built in about 1900, just around the turn of the 19th to 20th century. So we have slum clearance problems, and the people who moved out moved back into what was, for the time, remarkably better housing for the poor.
This would be then one of these instances when you have a national government that's still conservative through 1905, but at the local level you have these highly progressive actions that are taking place.
It made London, a place of tramways and clean streets and social and other improvements, but with higher taxes.
So it continues through the 1960s, and then it's abolished in 65 and replaced with the Greater London Council, right?
Where the boundaries had been set in 1888-89, of course the city had grown out and out, and particularly after 1918, London had expanded to double its size. We're now talking about a sort of Los Angeles-style sprawling city with endless new housing estates going ever onwards and outwards. So the question of how to align the size of London, the city, with transport responsibilities and police responsibilities, led eventually in 1965 to the creation of the Greater London Council.
So the GLC itself lasts for 21 years until it just causes too much anger in Mrs. Thatcher, right? Tell us about that.
Well, I mean, here we get to a lecture in British constitutional history, really. I remember at the time talking to Americans in particular who were just shocked at the idea that a prime minister could take office and decide to abolish a level of government with a sort of an act of parliament passed in a few weeks in the House of Commons and the House of Lords. That's the way the British do government. So Mrs. Thatcher is in power with a big majority, and she's a radical centre-right prime minister, and at the same time, again by coincidence, we have a radical centre-left, or way to the left by most standards, GLC leadership from 1981 onwards in the hands of Ken Livingstone. We'll hear more about him, no doubt. Ken Livingstone faces Mrs. Thatcher, County Hall, Parliament across the Thames at Westminster, and in the end Mrs. Thatcher can take no more of it and abolishes the GLC, and therefore for a period of 14 years after 1986 London has no directly elected city-wide government. The boroughs live on, the City of London as always lives on. Now, it's not to say there isn't some city-wide government. National government departments take some responsibilities. The boroughs set up joint committees to run the fire brigade. So the ghosts of city-wide government linger on until they're put back together, a bit like Humpty Dumpty, in 2000.
So you get a Labour leader back in, and a Labour leader decides to bring the government of London back.
The Labour Party is committed to recreating London-wide government. But Tony Blair, bit of a presidential kind of prime minister, has seen the American model of the directly elected mayor, and with some enthusiasm and encouragement from British commentators, decides that what London needs is not just a traditional municipality, a county municipality, but a directly elected executive mayor. So in May 2000, such an election takes place for an executive mayor after a referendum to test public opinion, and Ken Livingstone, who had been the last leader of the Greater London Council, becomes, as an independent, the first mayor of London. And that's the system, with the boroughs living on, we have today.